Hello and welcome to this edition of Standard Deviation, my column and video series. This time I'm going to be speaking to you about a relatively old question that has once again reared its head for Indian policymakers. What to do about China? Should we give in to the increasing trend of becoming a cog in the Chinese wheel, or should we create our own wheel through the judicious use of Chinese investments over here? Loosening the rules on Chinese investments in non strategic sectors has distinct advantages that shouldn't be cast aside due to the overarching bogey that's been created around security concerns. The security concerns are, of course, important, but they can be handled while simultaneously addressing economic needs. In May 2020, the Indian government issued something called Press Note 3, a short statement mandating that investments from countries sharing a land border with India would be permitted only after securing the Indian government's express approval. Before this notification, FDI from any country was automatically allowed, subject to the sector specific limits, of course. Given that about 99% of the FDI from India's neighbors over the previous 2 decades came only from China, it was clear who the 2020 press note was aimed at. Tensions along the border between the two countries had been mounting, and the new FDI rules didn't help matters. In June 2020, the armed forces of India and China engaged in their most violent conflict in 45 years. Since then, relations have been icy at best, although they appear to be thawing now. The Indian government used the opportunity of COVID-19 pandemic related relief measures to announce a slew of measures aimed at making India Atmanirbhar or self-reliant. The focus was to enhance the Make in India campaign. The problem policymakers are now facing is that these measures haven't really worked, at least not as originally hoped. Even as Prime Minister Narendra Modi has sought to incentivize manufacturing in India through various production linked incentive schemes, the components for this manufacturing have increasingly come from China, with Indian companies only engaged in assembling these parts. Indian imports from China surged from 65.2 billion in the financial year ended March 2021 to 101 billion in the year ended March 2024. The current financial year looks set to exceed even that figure, with imports in April to July 2024 already reaching 35.8 billion, nearly 10% higher than the same period of last year. With this trend unfolding, the latest economic survey in July raised the question of whether India should further integrate into China's supply chain, or should it allow Chinese FDI into the country to develop a robust supply chain of our own. This sparked a nationwide debate at the time. But Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal, however, categorically denied that India was re-evaluating the amendment of Press Note 3. So far, only a handful of Chinese investment proposals have been approved by the Indian government. A prominent example is a joint venture between China's SAIC Group and India's JSW Group to manufacture electric vehicles under the brand name JSW MG Motor India. This joint venture also illustrates how such partnerships can breed innovation. The company has, after a gap of 10 years, reintroduced the concept of battery as a service, a development that could significantly boost electric vehicle sales in India. We need more of this kind of innovative thinking. In late September this year, Sanjeev Sanyal, a member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister, batted for allowing Chinese FDI in non-strategic sectors during an interview with the Print. His question was, if India is already importing increasing amounts of parts from Chinese companies, why not allow those parts to be manufactured within India? This, he said, would create jobs and bring in capital and know-how. India needs all three. From a strategic point of view, Mr. Sanyal said that while India doesn't want companies like Huawei in its telecommunications sector due to the well-known security concerns around that company, Chinese plants in India could even become hostages should such a need ever arise. In his economic survey, Chief Economic Advisor V. Anant Nageshwaran made a point that is of particular relevance to India. Here's what he said, and I quote: "As the US and Europe shift their immediate sourcing away from China, it is more effective to have Chinese companies invest in India and then export the products to these markets rather than importing from China, adding minimal value, and then re-exporting them." End quote. This situation that he highlighted in this quote highlights both the opportunities and the threats India faces from Western trade actions against China. A neat case study of this phenomenon is the solar module industry. Under the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act implemented in June 2022, the US effectively blocked the imports of goods mined or manufactured in the Chinese province of Xinjiang. A significant part of these were solar modules. This presented an immediate opportunity for India, with solar module exports to the US surging from 37.5 million in January to July 2022 to 1.2 billion during the same period this year. That's a 3100% jump. The US accounts for up to 97% of India's exports of solar cells and modules, highlighting the benefits for India of US trade actions against China. But there are threats too. During this period, India's solar cell imports from China surged sixfold to 661 million, while imports of solar modules tripled to $1.6 billion. Although the US's actions currently benefit Indian solar module manufacturers, Indian power producers still prefer cells and modules from China simply because they are cheaper. Numerous solar power producers in India have said this. This dependency reveals the precarious nature of India's solar module exports. In May this year, US President Joe Biden doubled import tariffs on Chinese solar cell components, a move that could also benefit India as American solar power producers look for alternative sources. But given that the overwhelming share of India's solar module exports go to the US, and this too only because the US chooses not to import from China, any thaw in the US-China trade relations in the future would then leave Indian solar module manufacturers out in the cold. As more sectors become inextricably linked to Chinese imports, they will increasingly be hostage to international developments rather than domestic ones. One way to address this is by encouraging Chinese investments and manufacturing within India. Even if India does not want to amend Press Note 3, as Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal has said that they don't want to, an easy interim solution could be to fast track the pending non-strategic investment proposals from Chinese companies. And here again, I stress non-strategic because of course there are some security concerns that we cannot ignore. Unless the Indian government squares its security concerns with its economic exigencies, India will remain just a cog in the larger Chinese manufacturing wheel, hostage to the actions of third-party countries. Also, any long-term growth and stability will need us to play better with our neighbors. But on that note, that's all from me. Thank you for watching.